Greetings. Okay. Greetings and a warm welcome to all of you here at the Lawyers Hub. It's yet another exciting Policy Monday, and we are thrilled to host a public policy discussion on the Startup Bill 2022. So I'd want to just make a quick run down here before we start officially, and kindly you can write your names on the chat section and tell us where you're tuning in from. Any startup founders in the room, you can tell us if you're a startup founder. You can also tell us if you're a lawyer, an investor too. Yes, that comment section is there for all of you. Okay. Today we gather to take part in a vital conversation that aims to promote the growth and development of startups in our country. As a platform that seeks to advance dialogues on matters of public interest, we are delighted to have you join us in this discussion. This session marks a beginning of a series of public policy talks on the Startup Bill. So we are honored to set the pace for all other discussions that will follow. I'd want to give you a rundown of the event schedule, but before that, I'm glad to see the comments that are in the comment section. Please don't forget to write your name, tell us where you're tuning in from, and perhaps the society organization that you're representing. To just pass through the schedule for today, we have a fantastic lineup of speakers for you today. First, we'll hear from Dixon Ogugu, a highly knowledgeable lawyer, a policy and research assistant here at the Lawyers Hub, who will give us a comprehensive overview of the Startup Policy Bill. Following that, we'll also have an exciting poll to gauge our understanding of the bill. The next up, we also have our policy lead, Rispa Onyango, who will provide us with an in-depth analysis of the bill, highlighting its key provisions and implications. And finally, we will open the floor to all of you, our esteemed guests, to share your views and recommendations on this bill. So kindly, if you can also tag us in our social media platforms, feel free to tag us and share opinions on different social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. Just to give you our on LinkedIn, on Facebook, we are there at Lawyers Hub Kenya, on Twitter at Lawyers Hub Kenya, on LinkedIn as at Lawyers Hub, and we are also on Instagram at Lawyers Hub Kenya. So kindly, if you can also tag us with the opinions that you have on the Startup Policy Bill, we will be there to respond on your comments and your opinions. We'll be starting officially in the next 2 minutes. So kindly continue giving your comments in the comment section. There's also the Q&A tab over there. You can ask all your comments over there, and yes, let us see who's in the room currently. I can see Sharon Odeni. Yes, I can also see Valerie Yeager. Val, hi. Just give a thumbs up. I can see Claire Nyabuti from CNN Advocates LLP. Yes, I can see. Continue joining in as we start off this discussion on the Startup Policy Bill. Just to give you another info, it was open to the public by the Standing Committee on Trade, Industrialization and Tourism for submissions. The Startup Bill aims to support the growth and development of startups in the country as a platform that seeks to promote dialogue on matters of public interest. Members of the public are invited to participate in this discussion, and we are glad to host you here to set the base for all other public policy discussions on this bill. Yes. Hey, Rashid, Ngaira, and associates. I can see we have a lot of lawyers really joining in. This must be a very interesting discussion for policymakers and lawyers too in the room. I can't see any startup founders or startup. Okay. I can see Jessica Pio, you're raising your hand. We'll give you your time to ask a question at the end. Okay. So for those who are still joining us, just a bit of an outline of the events that will be happening today. We will be having an introduction from me, then we follow up with an overview and a screening of the startup policy bill by Dixon Ogugu, who is a policy assistant here at the Lawyers Hub. Then we will also have a poll that will make us understand this bill better. Then we will have a final clear understanding of this bill with our policy lead here at the Lawyers Hub, Rispa Onyango. So I believe I can start off. Okay, so we're good to start off. So I've already passed through all that I was to talk about today, but to just make this space for you, encourage you to make this space your own, to engage and to ask any questions. We have two rules in this discussion. One, there is no question that cannot be asked. And rule number two, let's have fun. Let's learn and have fun. So I also mentioned you can also tag us in our social media platforms. You can make your comments over there to just speak out your mind. So I will introduce the first speaker of the day. And this is a highly knowledgeable lawyer and a policy and research assistant here at the Lawyers Hub. So I'm sure he's set to take us off as the first speaker. So Dixon, you can dive deep into this exciting discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Silas, for this wonderful presentation that you have given us. So today we have the Startup Bill 2022 public discussion, mirroring on the this bill that was presented to the public by the Senate, by the Parliament, so that we can give our views on it. So basically, there are countries in the world that have the acts already. For example, in Africa, we only have 4 countries that have the act, that is Nigeria, Tunisia, Senegal, and Congo. They both have the Startup Bill, the Startup Act that regulates their startups in those particular countries. Across the continent, we also have France, Italy, South Korea, Singapore, Portugal, Estonia, Israel, United Kingdom, Canada, and Chile. They all do have the Startup Acts in their particular countries. And so Kenya will once the bill is fully agreed with the Parliament, will have part of the lists of those countries that have the acts that's the great startups in Africa, in Kenya. So in 2021, when the bill also came to Parliament and then came to the public for participation, the Lawyers Hub gave its submissions to the bill so that it can be better on and also be perfect for the startups in the country. So some of the submissions we made in 2021 were as follows. The shift in focus from incubators to startups, that is, the bill should shift its focus from incubators to startups because it's a startup bill. Also, the bill should also separate the eligibility for registration as a startup from the enrollment into an accelerator program. Also, the bill should rework the criteria for eligibility for admission into the incubator program. Also revise the scope of incubators under the clause 2 of the bill of 2021 The bill should also rework the eligibility for support to include all startups whether admitted into an incubator. Also, the bill of 2021 was supposed to clearly define the types of trainings and capacity building programs, and also outline the key performance indicators that startups can use to measure growth, including fiscal incentives for startups in the country. So once we gave our submissions and many other public citizens gave their submissions, the bill went back to Parliament. Then now we have the 2022 bill for startups. So basically, the bill of 2022 that was given out for public participation this month has the following objectives that it outlines in the bill. So one of the objectives is to foster a culture of innovative thinking and entrepreneurship. Also register startups. One of the main objectives of the bill is to register the startups, link them with financial institutions, private sector research institutions, and other relevant institutions to also ensure they perform perfect and better to the economy, and also provide the benefits they do have. Also facilitate investment, provide fiscal and non-fiscal support to startups, promote an enabling environment for establishment, development, conduct of business, and regulations of startups, establish incubator facilities, and also promote establishment of startups. So basically, the bill has those outlined objectives, as you can see on your screens. And so the bill, after the objectives, outlines the roles of national and county governments that they have in fostering and promoting startups in the country. The roles of those particular governments, both national and county governments, as outlined in the bill, are not limited to promoting innovation and facilitating the transfer of technology in the country, create a sustainable global competitive technological sector, promote the creation of employment and wealth in the country, also promote linkage between universities, research centers, and the business community. Also put in place a national and county incubation policy framework, establish certification and admission of programs for incubators, create an enabling environment to enable startups to operate, and support research and development activities, and provide training and capacity building programs for both startups and incubators. So basically, those are the roles the bill gives to national and county governments to enhance startup incorporation in the country. So for one to be eligible to register as a startup, according to the bill, one must be registered in Kenya as a private limited company, partnership firm, LLB, or non-governmental organization, be a newly registered or in existence for not a period of not more than 3 years. So basically, the company or the partnership should not be in existence for more than 3 years, or up to 5 years for if you are in a biotechnological sector from the date of your incorporation. Also have its objective of innovation, development, production, or improvement. Also have human resource, total assets, annual turnover numbers that not exceed an amount prescribed by the cabinet secretary. Also have its headquarters in Kenya. So basically you must be based in Kenya. Be an undistributive profits. Be wholly owned by one or more citizens of the country, and have at least 15% of your expenses to be attributed to research and development activities. Also be a holder and dispensary or licensee of a registered patent, or the owner and author of the registered software. There are exceptions in the bill to those who the bill not apply to, and those are those that are formed as a result of a split, reconstruction, and mergers, and also do not apply to holding companies or subsidiaries or an existing entity that is not registered as a startup. So for application for admission into an incubation program, so basically for you to apply for incubation programs in the country, pursuant to the bill, the applicant should submit to the agency or the county executive committee member as prescribed by section 1 of the bill, depending on who manages the incubation program. The applicant must include a statement containing specific information, a letter of recommendation, all supports, a certificate of incorporation, brief description of the nature of the product, of service, and other relevant information. The entity must be certified as an incubator if they are registered as a public limited company, NGO, private limited company, LLP, or partnership. Have the principal objective of delivering services to support innovation startups, have suitable facilities and equipment for startup activities, are administered by persons of recognized competence and have technical and marginal consulting, have regular cooperative relationships with universities, research centers, public institutions, and financial partners, and also have experience supporting innovation startups with described indicators. So basically, for you to be an incubator, you have to be eligible in all those areas for you to be registered as an incubator in the country, pursuant to the Act. Also, in consideration for application and registration for startups and incubators, the registrar or the county executive committee member will examine your application and documents within 30 days of your application. If necessary, they will also require you to provide further information or conduct inspection. And if you meet all the required requirements, the registrar or the county executive committee member will enter your name and the particulars in the registrar of startups, and will issue you with a certificate in the prescribed form according to this Act. So the Act also gives where one can be your application can be rejected, and basically it outlines that if you present false or misleading information, or do not comply with the provision of this particular Act, or your entity does not meet the criteria for registration, all the objectives of the entity are incompatible with the public interest. So basically what you do is incompatible with public interest. The registrar or the county executive committee will notify you by writing of the decision of the rejection and application within 14 days. So once you apply, then it's rejected. Within 14 days, you will be given a decision on why you were rejected for registration within 14 days, and it must be in writing. Also, once your startup has been registered, it can be registered pursuant to the Act, to the bill, where the registrar or the county executive committee mandated to register you as a startup. If your startup actually pursues an unlawful cause, all-purpose prejudicial to public interest, or if you fail to comply with the directives, or if your members are convicted of certain offenses pursuant to the bill. So the registrar, when registering your startup, will notify you in writing of the decision to register and provide you with the reasons as to why you have been registered as startups according to the Act, if it is passed by Parliament. So for you, there are certificates of incubators. So if you are to be certified as an incubator in the country, first you have to present your admission. You apply for admission as an incubator. Also provide required statement that includes your address, principal objectives, that is the projects that you do, research and development expenditure, your shareholders, investors, and also qualifications and experience in that particular sector, and your relationships with other incubators, financial statements, and also industrial and intellectual property rights that you do have. Also, you will be obligated to support novice technological enterprises and facilitate implementation of your ideas and determine the viability of innovation. And also, your incubation will also have a withdrawal program and how the agency will prescribe with you your guidelines and standards for your withdrawal from the program. So that's basically the registration processes that the bill outlines. The bill also contains incentives for startups under the Act that will incentivize you to register as a startup in the country. And they include, and not limited to, credit guarantee schemes that the CS may establish and provide you with financial support, credit information and capacity building for startups. The bill also provides you with training and capacity building, where the agency shall establish a program for training and capacity building and provide a platform with information and incubation, training programs, mentorship, fiscal and non-fiscal support services, and business information that you may need. Also, the bill outlines that the agency shall facilitate startups in applying for grants, the vocation of patents, and institutions of legal actions for infringement of intellectual property rights. And startups may also file and register patents at the international level. And there are also some fiscal incentives where the Cabinet Secretary shall put in place measures for granting fiscal incentives, including tax incentives for development of startups in the country. And there are also incentives like growth objectives, where the startup shall achieve the growth objective inherent to the workforce and total balance sheet and the annual turnover as set out by the Cabinet Secretary resolutions during the period of your validity as a startup. So the Act also has miscellaneous provisions that gives the Cabinet Secretary powers to provide and also form regulations to better the implementation of the startups in the country. So the regulations may include incentives for you for registration fees, maybe reduce the fee for registration, workplace and labor issues, commercial transactions, employment benefits, and intellectual property rights. And also the Science, Technological and Innovation Act, if the bill passes, will be amended to provide financial support for technological innovations registered under the Startup Act, and to include individuals with knowledge and experience, innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship. So once we at the Lawyer Sub read the bill to its totality, did our analysis of the bill, we actually gave our critics to the bill, and they are as follows. So looking at the bill, you will see that the success of this particular bill, with its good and incentives and objectives, for it to be achieved, basically we need to have effective implementation, as well as other laws in the country. Without implementation, they won't be able to achieve their full capacity and goals. The bill includes provisions for monitoring and evaluation, but however, it's very unclear on how it will be, who will be responsible for oversight of those particular ideas for monitoring and evaluation. There's also restriction on profit distribution, where one is deterred from entrepreneurs who are seeking to start a profitable business and could impact the growth of startup ecosystem in the country. The provision does not apply, does not specify the process for appeal or review, as I stated earlier, where if your startup is deregistered or your application is denied, there is no procedure for appeal. And these concerns will also raise fairness and transparency in the process. There is no prescribed amount for human resource, total asset, and annual turnover. Also, the requirements for registration, as I stated them earlier, are very complex for any early stage business, where you'll be required to have patents, a trademark, and those other requirements as stated in the Act. So once we saw what the bill has, we provided what we call recommendations, and where we'll rise back to Parliament, giving out our recommendations to the bill so that it can help you as a startup founder, or someone who wants to start a startup, or as a lawyer who wants to represent someone who has a startup in any case they face any challenge. So our recommendation, and so more that we will find from this policy brief that we have here. One of them is the bill should provide an online registration, whereby you'll be able to register for startup from your comfort of your home. At the moment, the bill does not provide for online registration. Also, the bill does not provide for a single registration point. There are numerous places you have to register. You have to go for licenses, permits, certification, individuals' offices. So you are recommending to the Parliament to provide a single registration point for the startup. The bill should also provide tax incentives, whereby it should state clearly the tax incentive they have for startups in the country, and also provide a clear framework for protecting the IP, your IP rights as a startup, including patents, trademark, and copyrights, and also simplify labor laws in the Act. Yeah, that's basically some of the few recommendations that we have for the bill before it's now actualized into law. So in 2021, comparing the 2021 bill to 2022 bill, just giving you just 1 minute comparison, you can see the part 1 and part 2 of those two bills, they're basically the same. There is no difference between the two parts. When you go to part 3 of those two bills, you can see, you will see the 2021 bill, clause 7B, where it gives only 3 duties for registrar, to the registrar and committee, which are the registrar shall register and supervise startups. But the new bill for 2022 gives more duties to the registrar, which are registrar, which will register your startup, inspect it, regulate, monitor, investigate, and supervise the startup, issue the new council with the approval of the board of agency, your startup registration. The county registrar and assistant registrar shall receive application of registration, vet them, and process application for startups. There are also additions of eligibility to register as a startup in the 2022 bill, which I have stated there. And when you see section 4 and 5, the section 23 is removed, which is not there in section 20 in our bill 2022, and the objectives in section 21 and bill 21 they're also removed. So in a nutshell, the two bills are basically the same. So that's my presentation as to the bill and what it entails in its entirety. So thank you for listening to me, and I wish you blessed next presentations.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dixon. And at this juncture, I want to introduce our policy lead here at the Lawyers Hub, Rispa Onyango. Kindly take a seat with us. Just to have a quick one with you, have you read the startup bill? And if no, why? And if yes, what are the comments on it? Are we better with or without it? What should be improved? What have they not touched on, and where have they not specifically clarified? So we'll be sharing the link of the startup bill in the chat section. Thanks, Grace Njoroge, for the clarification. The bill is open for public submissions and not participation. So I'll not take long. I'll just introduce Rispa. Rispa is our policy lead here at the Lawyers Hub.
Thank you, Silas. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And thank you, Dixon, for that very detailed analysis of the bill. I've seen some questions on the same, and I think we're going to get on that just now. But before that, we have Senator Seki Lenko on the call, and he'd like to make a few remarks on the bill. I think it would be very helpful to see some of the team members who actually participated in the kind of redrafting of this particular bill. And I think a big question is whether it was actually really, redrafted and all. And so I think we are going to give him an opportunity to just give us some of the remarks and some of the thought processes that went into some of the adjustments we've seen in this bill before we can proceed to a further analysis of some of the things we thought the bill would touch on. So Senator Senku, you're welcome. Over to you.
Hello, this is Lenko Kanar Seki, the Senator for Kajiado County, and the chairperson for the Committee on Trade and Industrialization in the Senate. I really want to appreciate the kind of discussion and conversation over this startup bill that has been introduced again to this Parliament, particularly the Senate. And I want to really appreciate that there's a very elaborate discussion that is coming up. And the Senate, through the Senator Honorable Sige, is sponsoring the bill. And I want to say that the Senate has taken it up, and we are in the first reading of this bill. And today it will come as a second reading or in Parliament, particularly down in the Senate, where from there we will do the advertisement of the bill, where again after that we will introduce again the more and more public participation on this again. So I think it is still open for more contribution. More opening is given to the public participation, to legal teams and well wishers to come in, and even the affected or even the people now who will use this bill, particularly the county governments and the common mwananchi. So I think to me, I just wanted to say that and give you assurance that in the next few days, sorry, there's something down there, but the few days that we want to see this bill ascended and becomes an act of the Senate. So I think we want to continue to listen to your contribution. And I have my colleague, legal officer in the Senate, Annette Kwamboka, who is also in this group and is listening the participation that is taking, that is on now. And we're going to observe and look at all the comments that is required here, so that at least we make sure that it is added in the bill. Otherwise, thank you so much, and I welcome the contributions.
Thank you very much, Senator. And we're glad to see that there's a more collaborative effort with government in terms of trying to enable the startup ecosystem in Kenya and just generally the entrepreneurship and the innovation ecosystem that we have. So I think I want to just dive in, and I've seen a lot of comments on the discussion group as relates to the difference between the two bills. And I'd give a few highlights on the same, and then maybe engage with you to get some of your remarks on the same. I see Noreen, I also seen Robert Karanja has a few comments on the same. And so I will quickly just touch on a few, and then I'll be able to open up the platform for all of us to be able to engage, because I believe all our submissions will be relevant for this particular discussion. Now, with regards to the startup, the definition of the startup, I think this was one of the main things that came up even the last time when it came to the eligibility of, who can qualify to register as a startup under this particular laws. Now, this particular one has kind of broadened it. And one of the things that you were saying here, the lawyers have, is it's giving it a very mandatory facing language, whereby it's a must. You have to do this, you have to comply with this, you must reach these objectives. And that seems to, go throughout the bill compared to the other one, which had a more, encouraging kind of innuendo to it, as opposed to you have to qualify like this in this particular manner for you to, go to the next step. So probably that is something we can engage on and get your views on the same. And as relates to being eligible for registration as a startup, one of the things it has actually introduced is that element of, you must have a human resource total assets, and an annual turnover, which does not exceed what is prescribed by the CS. Now, it hasn't detailed what exactly this would look like and what is covered in this scope in terms of your human resource, in terms of your total assets, in terms of your turnover. And I guess that is supposed to be guided by particular guidelines or the regulations, but that already in a way or in a sense would, for instance, be a challenge for startups. If you put a cap on, how they're supposed to operate or what that operation is supposed to look like, I think that is going to lock out a few people. Then we also noted that that element of having a branch has been removed from this particular bill. So the previous one had headquartered in Kenya, or you have a branch in Kenya. This particular one just provides for being headquartered in Kenya. Then that element of not being able to distribute profits has been introduced in this particular bill. That was not featured in the previous bill that we had. Then another element is the aspect of making it wholly owned by one or more Kenyans. Now, I think my understanding of this would be then there's no, is it shareholding of sorts? So you see how we get, for instance, with the Communication Authority, there's that element for a third of it has to be local shareholding. In this case, that that need for wholesomeness by one or more Kenyans, does that then, remove people who, are partnering with foreigners in the setup of their startup, or where does it place, such entities? And then the element around the need for registration, either of a patent or of your software. I think one of the things that comes up with many startups is, as they're beginning to set up, we find that many of them actually are not, cognizant of most of these legal frameworks. They need to either register your IP, how to go about incorporation and all that. And so if we are putting this as a mandatory, eligibility criteria, then how does that feature for the actual, the startups that we have and as we know them? So those are some of the features that we found, and it was very interesting to see that these have been introduced in this particular bill, and many of them weren't featuring in the bill previously. And I think the recurrent question, the recurrent theme is this then going to enable innovation in Kenya, or is it actually going to be a hindrance? I think WIPO put out a report just the other day where they put Kenya, and we were ranking as 4 when it comes to innovation. So we are ranking 4 behind Mauritius, behind South Africa and Botswana. So that means we are doing well, right? We have some effort that we are putting in. So we wouldn't want a situation where the regulations or the laws are coming in to hinder the kind of progress that we already have. So I'd like your views on that. I think I saw someone who mentioned and stated that element of having all these requirements, doesn't that make it, a challenge? Doesn't that make it a hindrance? And one of the conversations we were having last time was around, it being an additional requirement, as opposed to just registering as a company, a partnership and all. You're also now required to be able to do these other things. So does that now elevate the need for too many requirements, or is it something that is actually going to be beneficial? If you look at the Nigerian startup and you also look at the Tunisian startup, what you find is that they have this labeling scheme or mechanism where they just have some qualifications that you can then be able to label as a startup, and then from that be able to qualify for the incentives. So you find that their list isn't as long as ours. And so maybe that is food for thought, something we could want to consider. I've seen someone also has mentioned that many of the recommendations and the submissions that you're making today, they seem very similar to what we did the last time. And then does that mean then that there's not much thought or not much that was put to the previous submissions that were already made? So that is a question again for our government, and hopefully we could see some adaptations, even as they proceed with the readings. Something that I thought was beneficial, I think just before I move on to that element of deregistration, we also saw that in this particular bill, they have removed that leeway for the CS being able to introduce other requirements that could satisfy your need to be registered as a startup. We don't find that in this bill. The previous one had allowed for some sort of wiggle room where at any one point additional features could be added to the list or removed at the liberty of the CS. That is no longer there. So the requirements that you see as included within the startup bill, that is it, and that's all the requirements that are needed to be followed. So whether that is a good thing or not, again, is a question we'd like to pose. Now, this bill has actually done, it's done something good when it comes to allowing for, the deregistration and also allowing for a notice of cancellation. So they provide a procedure through which you can be able to do so. And they also provide for you being able to deregister as a startup or from an incubation program. That wasn't featured in the previous bill. And so that allows for, at least it gives a bit more transparency and a bit more, systems within which you can be able to operate as a startup. We find that also it has added to the responsibility of the registrar of startups. So the registrar of startups, of course, covers the deputy registrar. It also covers the county level of it, that is the county executive members. And in terms of their responsibility, they have been allowed to also register, to inspect, to regulate, to monitor, to investigate, and to supervise startups that have been registered under the Act. Now, of course, this gives a very supervisory role for them, and it allows for more, maybe probably accountability and enforceability of the Act. And to that extent, then, I don't know whether this will fizzle out our startups or it will just allow for a more viable operation within the ecosystem. So we noted that has been added. So it's not as vague as it was previously when it came to the mandate of the registrar. This really goes into the details of exactly how they're going to be going about regulation. So they can be able to come in and inspect the startups. They can be able to come in and monitor their compliance with the Act and so forth and so forth. And so to that extent, I think the beauty of it is that they've been able to decentralize. You found this also in the other act. So it's not just, at a national level. So even at the county level, they have been able to specify the issues around the county executive committees, the deputy registrars, and the assistant registrars. Now, I think it would have been pleasant if we could have, or maybe this could feature in the regulations, just the criteria of all of this, dockets, who qualifies, who's going to be in this place, what is that operation going to look like? It will be very beneficial to have that put in place. Now, something that I noted as well was the burden that has been placed on the startups. And again, this is a question I'm posing to us as listeners, as guys in policy, as startups, and even as government. We find that the burden here is very, it's a mandatory sort of burden, where section 22 requires that the startups are able to, one, achieve the growth goals that are related to human resource, the total assets, and the annual turnover. And then they have also been able to qualify this when it comes to how it's going to be looking like. So it will fall back to the regulations and the prescriptions we talked about that the CS will be putting out. Now, if you compare this to the last bill, you find that this function wasn't mandatory as it is now. They were supposed to be encouraged to be able to be in compliance with their growth goals and objectives. This one requires them to actually achieve their growth goals. Now, how feasible is that? How do we regulate that? Yeah, so that is the question. How will this be achieved? How will we continually be able to rate some of these things that we are requiring of the startups? And doesn't this now just add, doesn't it just add pressure on the startups as we know it, considering they are, up and coming? Of course, they're innovative. Of course, they have, crazy ability to scale, but they're also operating on such dynamic ecosystems and, restrictions. So wouldn't it be wise not to mandatorily place that burden on them, as opposed to just encourage them to be able to meet their particular goals and regulations? That is a question that we thought we could pose. When it comes to the certification of incubators, one thing we have noted is that, and one of the concerns that were there, that was raised the last time, was that the bill really heavily focuses on incubators as opposed to just, the startup. And if you compare it even with the Nigerian Act, for example, or the Tunisian one, you find that the incubator scope is not as heavy as you find it within our particular bill. And so what they have done with this particular bill, I think is, and this is a commendation, will be the increased scope within the role that the incubator is supposed to play. So last time it was very vague again. This time I've tried to really highlight a bit in detail some of the ways in which an incubator is supposed to facilitate help for the different startups. So in terms of, the kind of facilities that they're offering, in terms of the kind of equipment that they should have to offer that supportive environment for the different startups, in terms of competency and collaboration. So to the extent that they've tried to kind of unpack that, I think that is definitely a very good aspect. But then the question will be, can we also really focus on the startups themselves and not just primarily, rein in on the incubators? And again, a question that was posed was that intersection between registering as a startup and being enrolled into an incubation program. So you find that within this bill, and even as we saw it in the last one, these two things are working in tandem. So there's not much separation between you being able to register as a startup and then you being able to enroll into an incubator program. It seems that registration into an incubator program qualifies as registration as a startup, even if you look at the criteria. Once you've satisfied one criteria, then it automatically means you have satisfied the other criteria. And we thought this could be a challenge where we are locking out those people who are not, for instance, in need of incubator programs. So for instance, people who have scaled and you're not at the early stage startup, if we are tying these two definitions to work hand in hand, because even if you look at the bill, the way the language is adopted is one is mirroring the other, or one is acting in place of another. So for instance, when you talk about certification, when you talk about registration with the incubator program, then it's automatically, it seems that you have also talked about registration as a startup. And one of the recommendations we had made was that for the two things to be separated, let us have in registration of a startup, and then let us have criteria for enrolling into an incubator, so that one doesn't disqualify you from the other. And we haven't seen that amendment being made in this particular bill. And so the language is still the same as we had seen it in the previous one. When it comes to their obligations, and that is the incubators, we find that it has a bit more obligation being given unto the incubators. And one is they are required to also raise capital and prepare marketing for startups, as well as enhance the entrepreneurship in Kenya. Now, I think I saw a few incubators, guys within the incubation space on the call. Maybe you can tell us whether this will be a challenge or whether you will be comfortable with this, to the extent that, there's that mandate to be able to raise capital for the startup. So is this something that you think is comfortable for the incubation? Because this wasn't featuring in the previous bill. So I think I'd like comments from yourselves to just hear what you think of that particular provision. Now, when it comes to, lastly, I'll just talk about the objectives and the incentives, as they appear within this particular bill. Now, when it comes to the credit guarantee scheme, we are finding that they have reduced the provisions. So now they have zeroed in on three main provisions, and that is access to finance, so financial support for the startups, and then availing this kind of financial and credit information, and also capacity building. If you look at the previous one, some of the things that were included there was the framework for the credit guarantee for startups. So it had provided for that. And then also guarantee for investors in startups was within that last bill. This has since been removed within this particular bill. And so those two provisions are no longer there. And particularly maybe will be that issue around the guarantee for investors. And we find that if you look at the Nigerian bill, for instance, and even the Tunisian one, there is that provision for incentives for investors who are coming in to support these startups. That is no longer the case within our bill. And I think that is a question and a concern to be raised. We also find that when it comes to the particular incentives that are being raised within this bill, and this is again a question that we had raised the last time, as relates to just how particular they are and how keen and elaborate they are in putting together these incentives. So part 5 of this bill touches on the different incentives. But what you note, if you were to do a comparative with, again, the Tunisian one, for instance, it is not as detailed. And I'll give the example of the Tunisia Startup Act. It gives, for instance, 1 year leave to, startup founders. It gives 1 year support. It allows for particular taxation incentives, which are actually clearly highlighted. And the same you find within the Nigerian Act. Now, for us, it's very vague. Yeah. So one is, it says that there's going to be, in collaboration with the Ministry of Finance, then they can be able to put together some incentives, but there's no particular detail as to what exactly would these tax incentives look like. When it comes to, of course, the training, they have been able to be categorical about that, so that's good. In terms of facilitating, grants for intellectual property, whether, and also the legal capacity for infringement, that has been helped. But then they've not been able to subsidize. I'll allow for my colleague to, thank you. But then they've not been able to clearly indicate what tax incentives actually look like. So I thought that was a challenge, because it will be great if, getting in, you're really able to pick out what incentives are supposed to look like, what is the support supposed to look like. And this is one of the recommendations, again, we had made previously, but I don't think it has been really factored in within this particular bill. And so the question remains, is our bill actually here to support the growth, and the innovation that we are seeking to push for, or is it going to act as a hindrance? And that's just based on the key things, the key features that I have highlighted. So the criteria for the startups, being able to separate that registration process, whether as a startup or as an incubation program, and then looking at the particular incentives that they're actually offering these particular startups, and then also being able to kind of focus on the startups themselves and not over focus on the incubation programs. And I think another question that I've just remembered that wasn't really addressed or doesn't clearly come out will be, when it comes to the incubation programs, have they just zeroed in on government-run programs, or have they now also included, the private incubators? So it will be really good to know, to demarcate or to really see at which point what is operating. And this is, again, something we had raised, the previous time over. So we are finding the issues we had raised previously are, again, we are regurgitating them. And so the question remains, the interest, how can we be able to continue to support our ecosystem and not actually bury it in bureaucracy and just, hinder the innovation that we are seeking to promote within our space. I think that's it from me. Those are the main comments that, I'd like to pose to you and probably get your feedback on as we are opening up for discussions with you. And I'm really seeing a lot of engagement on the chat section, and we'd be happy to, to hear you voicing some of these issues. But before we do that, I think we will quickly run the poll. I've seen that we have a dynamic audience. We have the startups, we have investors, we have government, we have policymakers in the room. So kindly just work with us and let us run this poll very quickly. Poll 1 would be the question around, I see you guys also, you've already done it. Okay, great. So the first question was whether you're a holder, depository, or licensee of a registered patent. So this is either for if you're a startup, and even if you've been an investor before. I'm sure you've worked with a number of startups. You can just pick out some of the startups you've worked with and give us those stats based on your analysis. If you're an incubator, an incubation hub, the startups that you guys have been able to work with, you can be able to quickly give us an analysis of this. The second question was around ownership. So have you registered or owned, are you an owner or author of a registered software? Then we have the issue around registration, just as a business. So whether as a company, a partnership, a sole proprietorship, have you been able to do this registration? And then the extent to which, your startup is owned by Kenyans. So are you fully owned by Kenyans? Do you have foreign founders as well? And then lastly, whether you have been part of an incubation program. So it will be really great to get your feedback so that you can also see the relevance in application in some of the key features that are coming up with within this bill. So I think we'll give it one more second to just have a go at it.
And just to clarify, this also applies to any investor who has dealt with startups too. They can tell us the experience of the startups that they have dealt with. So this poll is not just for the startup founders only.
Okay, I think with that we can be able to close the poll and just see how we've done. I see there's a hand raised, so we'll just do the results of the poll and then we can get into the room, because this is not supposed to be just, a one traffic conversation. We'd really like to hear from you as well. So when it comes to question 1, we find that we have 74% saying no. So are you a holder or licensee of a registered patent? We are finding that 74% of you are saying no. Are you an author or owner of a registered software? 84% is saying no. Have you registered your business in any of the existing laws? 71% is saying yes, so that's fantastic. And then when it comes to ownership, we are getting a 65% saying yes, being fully owned by Kenyans. Then 35% is saying no. Then when it comes to incubation, have you been part of an incubation program? Then only 23% is saying yes, and 77% is saying no. Now, if we could look at the criteria for registration as a startup, we see just based off of this poll and the guys who've attended this particular meeting, a number of us would be locked out, right? So again, is that going to help, our ecosystem? Is that going to be supportive, or is it actually going to be a hindrance? And I think we also saw these discussions when we were looking at the ICT practitioners bill. The challenge was the same. It seemed that the criteria were more restrictive than they were actually enabling, the ecosystem. So let me hear from you. I think we can start with Erica. Guys, feel free to just put up your hand and share your thoughts, your submissions, so we can be able to also add them to what we have and be able to share the same with the Senate as they continue with the sittings. So we'll start with Erica and then we will move to Noreen in that particular order. So Erica, you're welcome.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Lovely. My name is Erica Zachary. I am a business owner, and I'm also a member of what's commonly known as Region 6, which is the portion of the African Union that is not recognized by the African Union. In other words, all of us who are the descendants of slaves. African-American women in the United States continue year over year to be the largest group of startup founders in the United States, but they are consistently ignored by policy in African Union member states. The avatar or the archetype for an investor continues to be a foreign male who is not of color. And so Kenya and many other jurisdictions continue to lose out on that revenue from the thousands of returnees who are going to South Africa, who are going to Ghana, who are going to Mauritius, who are going to other jurisdictions that are more business friendly for them. So I would like to encourage the policymakers in the room to realize that African Americans, Afro-Canadians, Afro-British, Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Latin populations are probably your best bet for revenue and for startup capital. It's also important to know the identity of these populations. These populations are not women who need incubators. These are women who already own businesses, who are usually between the ages of 35 and 60. And they are essentially evacuating from the United States, from the UK, from Canada, and from other jurisdictions where they face severe discrimination. And so they are looking for jurisdictions where they can live, where they can be safe, and where they can operate their businesses. So tax schemes that are encouraged by the British through the International Center for Tax and Development are very damaging for this population. Worldwide tax rates that are far too high and that would damage them and not allow them enough runway to be able to make sustainable profits because they're taxed both in their home jurisdiction and in the jurisdiction where they're living. All of these tax schemes make it a very hostile environment for these investors. So I would encourage you, the people are already here. The populations are already here. They're living among you and they look like you and they aren't male. And so I would encourage you to continue to, as you're doing your policy development, remember that there is over $3 trillion, Black dollars that are available. And that's just the African-American portion of diaspora. So that's $3 trillion that Kenya doesn't tap into because you don't consider us a proper investment class. And I'd like to encourage you to consider us an investment class. Thank you.
I will move to Noreen.
Hi, thank you so much. I had a couple of questions, and this is based on what was shared for the startup bill. The one thing that I thought was a little bit limiting was the definition of what a startup is, which includes a technology-based innovation. So my name is Noreen, and I run a couple of incubators and accelerators, I think 3 to every quarter or every other quarter. And majority of the guys who do participate in these incubators are not 100% tech. So we have a 50-50 show up, heavily tech or non-tech. And that, what we do, we don't discriminate because at the end of the day, we're looking at maybe 3 major criteria. Are you able to sustain, to scale, and opportunity for employment? So that's our major criteria when we do so. So if we limit them to tech, then you're automatically canceling out a very big group of people that are already in the space who could qualify as a startup / SME. So even in the definition itself, it would cancel a lot of people out. That would be the first one. Then the second one would be, and it's a question I posted in the Q&A section. When we look at the definition of incubator / accelerator, does the already existing in the ecosystem get grandfathered in based on this startup bill? Because I'm an incubator because I'm a corporate incubator. So that's a very distinct difference from the usual incubators that show up in the ecosystem. So as a corporate incubator, what we do is we run within our corporation incubations for interested, because we also have product and services that they can later join in future once they participate in the incubator / accelerator. So does that, where would I go inside that criteria? Because I'll be kind of lost in that space. Then the last one would be looking at just does one come chicken and the egg kind of conversation. So when we look at IP, has the IP part of that conversation already been taken care of? That when I have a startup that joins our accelerator, that I can tell them, okay, you need to go to X, this space that already would take care of your IP, whether it's a code, whether it's an application, what have you, because they already know they are protected. Majority of the startups that come into our accelerators are always concerned about IP. So we always encourage them to do it stealth. They don't need to give us any information, but they need to meet the criteria of scalable, sustainable, and opportunity for employment, because that's the only way I would encourage people to join the accelerator, because I am protecting them from any opportunity of IP theft. Then the last one would be when you're addressing, I don't know how to put this. So when you're addressing the criteria of a startup, because it's very different from what's there in Tunisia. They had startup, SME, and other. How does that apply into taxation? Because we already have that already existing as a company, isn't it? When I do a company registration, if I fall under, is it 3 million or 5 million, then I don't need to be inside tax. Do those kind of laws and regulations already apply for startups? When we hinder startups from quote starting up, and we are not clear in the registration process, and I hate to say this, inside the registration process, just for me to start up, it is extremely annoying and inhibitive. Why wouldn't it be that immediately I log in, you're already asking me precursory questions where I can determine, I don't want to be a startup, I'm an SME. And then I follow this route. And then I am a startup and I'm not interested in whatever it is, because when we start creating very tight swim lanes, it's very difficult for one to change the swim lanes when it is restrictive. What has been there in, because I've done about 7 cohorts, what has been there in that consistent question from the startup is, what is my registration? Do I need to register first before I do a startup? It's all those little nuances that you can hear from the founder is already a hindrance to business. You can hear they're already struggling with the taxation, the registration, this board of trustees, and then there's that extra line that you've put in there, which is sorry, not you, but that is already in the governance of it, is the registrar needs to keep track. Why? I'm just leaving that as an open-ended question. Why? Why do they need to keep track? What is the purpose? Why can it be a downloadable spreadsheet that says these are the number of startups or SMEs that have been present in Kajiado County, and then figure out what they need to participate in? I don't like governance in already a place that is heavily governed. And then when we're trying to encourage, because we tend to encourage in our accelerator from 16 to 99, we have no age restriction. So already, if I'm looking at a retiree who's come out from corporation and really wants to have a startup, and then they realize it's easier for me to go back to work, but there's no work, and I don't want to do a startup because there's all these nuances and restrictions that are already in place, you leave people hanging. So there's a missed opportunity in very many avenues, whether it's taxation, whether it's employment, whether it's revenue generation. All those spaces get hit because of these restrictions that have already been put in place or are considered to be put in place for anybody to start a business. Because a baker would be a startup because they still need to go through seed, pre-seed. At every level of acceleration inside startups, they do need incubation or could choose incubation because there's opportunity for that. And then the last one would be, why should an incubator be also a fund provider? Not everybody has the opportunity like Y Combinator. I'm not backed up by Google. Already myself as an incubator in our corporate incubation, we come out of pocket. It's very hard to engage Google, and we don't have the structure in the ecosystem that could encourage, like lawyers have to be a sponsor inside when we do an accelerator that is specifically inside a vertical, or could engage like Equity Bank. We have a lot of fintechs that have applied this turnaround. Would you be a sponsor? The engagement already is extremely difficult. Why would you now have it as, for me as an incubator, when I've already been successful, to now start asking me to provide funds? Doesn't exist. Not everybody is quote CC Hub, which is part of iHub. They had already created that ecosystem. We're not that lucky enough, and the structure in itself is not available because my calendar is entirely heavily based on the calendar of the fiscal calendar of foreigners. So I'll say, because we're based out of, part of our mandate comes out of LA, I'm lucky enough to get access to them. Not all the time. So they always ask us, how do we help you with funding? We're like, well, we can't ask Google Local because they're already tapped out. And we also have to look at on the back end, they're heavily requested for these spaces in funding. So that would be restrictive to have an incubator be also funding opportunity. Those are my 2 cents. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for that, Noreen. I think
You're most welcome.
You've summarized wonderfully, the key points that were coming up. And I think I'll give opportunity to 2 more people who are on the call to give us their input, and then we can begin to wrap up. So we have Paul, and then after that, we will proceed to Robert Karanja and Nyambura.
Hi,
So Paul,
by Paul, do you mean Paul Kokuboya? Thank you. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here and to listen. I was really encouraged to hear some of the views, because when we work back in government, this is something that we sort of imagined would happen one day, and it's nice to see it actually take place. Let me just give comments quickly. In terms of the bill and its focus on technology startups, I have no problem with that, because if you try to have a startup bill that had every sphere of potential business, I think this bill would not suffice. I had my previous speaker speak about, for example, the role of a non-tech enabled business, say a gardener, someone who's studying gardening services, or a baker. This bill is not within that space. I think it's nice to have a bit of a focus with respect to the law. The second issue is that what I agree with some of the speakers, and including yourself who did the analysis, is the bill seems to pose a bit of a governance burden on startups, because the mentality of a typical startup person is very unbureaucratic. And so I think we should be cautious about over legislating for people whose culture as being an entrepreneur is basically to be a little bit free of a lot of encumbrances. You'd achieve a bit more. And that's a general comment, and I don't want to expand on that too much. The third issue is that the issue that I'm the greatest concern about is the citizen centricity. It seems to contradict everything about how big technology hubs are founded around the world. You need the embediment. I mean, you need the coming together of so many different cultures and minds to create a truly great technology ecosystem. And every country is trying to do this. And I think looking at different countries and different laws is probably not the way to do it, because if you look at the place where this has been most successful, which is the Silicon Valley, and you trace back to what made it successful, is a convergence between education, excellent education, and this whole sort of free to experiment environment. So whereas the law is good, I think if I was to maybe try and meet the law, the people the bill drafters halfway, I'd say maybe create a clause that encourages startups to look for startups that are also international in nature. In other words, bringing international founders, because it serves a purpose. It serves a different purpose. It means that if you're in the county of Bungoma and you wanted to give incentives and compete against the county of another county, you should be able to add more incentives to allow people to come in from wherever they need to come to come and start up your business there, whether they're foreigners, whether it's a different county, because the way it's phrased right now, with a lot of responsibility given to counties as well, there might be the unintended consequence of protectionism at county level and protectionism at national level. So somebody reading this bill will say what it is intended to do is actually to protect Kenyan startups from foreign competition and foreign founders. And I know that we've had an issue in this country because people feel that sometimes the country has been designed around the fact that a lot of people who come from out of the country come and find it an easy place to start business, and therefore they can raise money easier than locals. I don't think that's a problem. I think what we need to do is just address the issue by saying, how do we incentivize Kenyan founders without discouraging international founders? Because one of the things that I know is intended is that Kenya becomes a top 10 hub for founders. And because we've got good social facilities, it should be possible for somebody to come from Gabon and say, look, I'm 21 years old, I write good code, I'm going to get a visa, I'm going to stay in Kenya for 5 years, I'm going to stay in a room with my mates who I met at university in Rwanda, and we'll start a business. That is how businesses are started. And of all the points I want to make, that's the big one. And then the other issue I agree with the previous speaker is incubators are not always funders. The role of an incubator isn't always about funding, because many incubators provide very important sort of handholding. In fact, in Kenya, sometimes the issues are not even funding. Sometimes the issues are just business maturity. Somebody doesn't know how to write a spreadsheet. Somebody doesn't know how to do accounts, but they've got a good idea. And that's a problem not just for startups, it's a problem for established businesses as well. So I think those are my points. And I'd say that with a bit of tweaking, I think this bill is going to be important. I don't think we get a perfect bill, but I think we go ahead and get a bill that takes us forward, and then we can always sort of try and amend and grow and learn based on feedback. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Paul. I'll quickly move on to Robert.
Thank you so much. And I think I'm privileged to be following two good contributions already. So my name is Robert Karanja. I work with Build Africa. So I do wear the hat of both an incubator and an investor. And I think my main concern with the bill, and I think there's some key distinctions with the old one. And what I see that I think I'm really most worried about at this point is the practitioner's voice needs to really come on board. I'll give you a very good example. So for example, one of the criteria I've said for startups is that they should patent. Now,
Yes.
I'm an investor and I hate startups that patent before they have any clue where the money is going to come from to do PCT. Because then what you end up is a really great idea that is amazing. You want to invest in it, but then this person, they were told patent, and they failed to realize it's not a legal issue, it's also a business strategy issue. And what typically then happens is that they go ahead and patent, the window for PCT closes, and then they are, and then as you know, to fundraise takes time. You know, it's not something that you do within a week. You have to go through due diligence, you have to go through the negotiations and what have you. And it's really very painful to have to shut down potential investments because this person has a patent for a small population of 50 million, but has given away the secret sauce to the rest of the world. So here patenting, you're putting it as, you're joining the club of Kippy, who are my friends, but then they also become my enemies when they don't give a full appreciation of what patenting requires. It's something you don't do without the money to implement it, both in terms of PCT applications, but then the annual fees that you pay to maintain that patent in the various jurisdictions. So coming back to the bigger picture of what is the startup bill supposed to do, a successful bill needs to do two critical things. The first one is, how do we de-risk early stage for founders? How do we de-risk early stage for investors? So we need to start moving away from startup and incubator to really just appreciate that entire value chain. Then the second question is, how do you incentivize exits? And by this, what I really mean is that this startup ecosystem, this startup economy needs to be building, creating jobs and creating wealth locally. When our startups do their IPOs in NASDAQ and London Stock Exchange and Singapore and all of these other financial hubs, will be within the next 10, 15 years, what will be seen is a massive exit of wealth from Africa to the already developed world. And mind you, most of these startups are coming in talking about social entrepreneurship, impact investment, mining the gold at the bottom of the economic pyramid. We are going to end up worse off than where we are today. So how do we get it right? So to me, my request is, let's rethink the purpose of this startup bill. When we say we want to coordinate the various actors and to shape the ecosystem, it's to what end? It's so that we create jobs, it's so that we create wealth locally. And who are the people we need to be speaking to? Who are the key people that should be addressed within this act? And what should they be told? How do we incentivize them? How do we become the conductor for an orchestra is what the startup bill really needs to be speaking to. So I'll stop there and thank you again for the opportunity. And please do engage us. I think we've had really great feedback from practitioners so that we get the right law that makes sense for the industry, because it is all about business at the end of the day.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for that, Robert. And lastly, I'll allow Nyambura to share with us her submissions.
Hi everyone. All protocols observed. I'm a Gen Z, so I don't all that. And so I have a few points. Number one is just following up on what someone said: reliance on foreign aid. I am a Pan-Africanist. We don't need foreign aid to invest in our startups. Like every year, the Kenyan government collects 10 billion with a B in unclaimed assets. We can use those assets. We can educate. So my biggest point is education for us locals. It needs to be a very big part of the bill, because our local investors, our kingpins who only know how to build purotis, like, okay, formal language. Local investors who know the only way of investing is buying land and building apartments, they don't know that they can be investing in our local startups. And we're looking into foreign aid to help us do that, but we have the people here within us. So we need to have more public discussions and public forums. Like education is always number one. And a good example, and I want to talk about a company called Sandbox, not affiliated with them in any way whatsoever, but I think as senators, as the government, you could work with them to, so they have all the experts that an SME needs in one place. They call themselves the village experts. So as the government, you could work in engage local stakeholders like this who are already doing the work, run by Joram Wenamo, amazing man. And he has everything that an SME needs to succeed. So instead of the government starting to do this all on its own, you can already work with local stakeholders who are already doing this work instead of just like coming and invest. Like collaboration is the number one thing that we need if we want to transform the startup space. Number two, there's a lot of barriers for entry for the startup bill. Number one, sole proprietorships are not included. Number two, the average hustler, the common mwananchi, who the mama mboga, the boda boda guy, who make up the majority of our economy, are not included anywhere in this bill. They don't have personal KRA pins. They use M-Pesa to transact. They don't have time to go find a lawyer to help them understand all this legalese and big language. So again, it goes back to the aspect of education. Education for the common mwananchi, the average hustler, who's like, makes up most of the businesses that are being run right now. They don't know all about bureaucracy and everything. So education is the first place we need to start. And even going into tech, I see, like, I am in the SME space myself, and I'm in rooms where I see these kids, they have great ideas, but the number one thing they want to do is fundraise. They've not even tested the validity of whatever they're trying to bring to the market. So again, education. Let's make sure we're educating everyone from the local investors to the global. Someone said global in the chat. I got confused. To the local mananchi, that Buddha guy, and to let's collaborate. Let's engage with local stakeholders who are already doing the work, like Sandbox and Wild and other people that I don't know yet. Let's collaborate and. Kenya Kwanza, this country is ours. It doesn't matter where the ideas are coming from, as long as the ideas are building each of us. Yeah, that's all. Thank you for this platform.
Thank you, Nyambura. It's always great to end with a Gen Z. People mistake me for a Gen Z by the way, but I won't say anymore. But thank you so much, guys, for all your input. I think we have gotten some really fantastic insights from you in terms of your submissions, which we will definitely incorporate within our report as we move forward. And definitely, I think one of the key things that is coming out is that element of collaboration and partnership, where we can work together to just make sure we better the entire ecosystem. So I'm going to be reading some of the remarks. I think I'll allow Silas to do that for you, for the guys who've just put their comments on the chat section.
Yes.
Yeah.
I can pass through some of the comments in the chat section, and I was trying to read them with my tablet, but my eyes were failing me. So I can speak about Erika's Zakari's comment. The Silicon Valley has been horrific for Black founders in tech. We have to change the avatar of founders. These people achieved in the face of various types of discrimination. Okay, let me just scroll them directly from here. Thank you so much, Ken. So yeah, finishing up, we as researchers and as individuals can learn from their stories about the history of systemic racism in the Bay Area and the diverse racism in those decades. Robert Karanja speaks on, I would love to engage more on this. There are few key distinctions in the bill that makes them very different. Also, I can see a comment from Morgan. Morgan is saying, following from Uganda, however, as EAC, we need to harmonize the legal framework that will attract real investment and provide a conducive environment for startups operating in the community. We need to speak as a block. Just going into one more before we wrap up the session. So yes, I I'm seeing here a question from Paul Kukubo. He's asking, why is the bill about Kenyan citizens? This is a contradiction. Although immigrants today account for less than 14% of the US population, they found almost a quarter of all new business, half of all Silicon Valley high-tech startups, and nearly 1/3 of all VC-backed companies. So to just clear up with one more comment, Eric Musau is saying, I think the reason for the stringent component is because the potential grant support to the incubation hubs, I get the sense that there is a significant responsibility placed on the hubs to ensure that the startups register their intellectual property in advance. Startups should rightly not be distributing profits, as they should be viewed as small and an investing phase. The thinking is that if startups exceed a certain size, they stop receiving incentives under the legislation. So yeah, these are some of the topics we were really talking even before we started this discussion. I remember, Rispa, we were having this discussion mostly on, I was even surprised that the bill has been there severally, 2018, 2021, and recently 2021, and now 2022. So I hope you're moving forward. And you can research on your own, look at what the other countries are really doing in terms of their startup bills and policies. So yes, I want to wrap up. I don't think if you have a final remarks or...
No, nothing from my end. I think
Okay.
I'm really thrilled by the kind of engagement we've gotten. It's good to always have people who, you know, have the same mindset and are able to see some of the issues that you're identifying. And so having a voice, you know, going over and over the same thing and giving some of the nuances that you are featuring is actually good for the ecosystem, because it means that we are on the same page, and with a few tweaks to the bill, we can be able to, you know, move forward. I think it was Paul who mentioned that we could have something, let's have a framework, but then let's also make it such that we are able to learn from it and able to adapt it to actually fit the needs of the people.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much, Rispa. Thank you all for your participation in this vibrant discussion on the startup bill. We have covered a lot of ground and gained valuable insights from our esteemed panelists and audience members. Your contribution has been invaluable in shaping this discussion. We hope that this discussion has inspired you to take action and submit your feedback to the Standing Committee on Trade, Industrialization. Let us continue to work together to create an enabling environment for startups and thrive to play a critical role in our community. Before we wrap up, I would like to express my gratitude to our panelists, Dixon Ogugu and Rispa Onyango, for their exceptional insights and expertise. Your contributions have been invaluable in making this event a success. Once again, thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to follow us on our social media platforms to stay updated on our upcoming events and discussions, our data protection training, and mostly the Africa Low Tech Festival 2023, which will be themed on digital trade. So let's continue to engage, learn, and make impact together. And I hope you have a good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us, and see you on the next Policy Monday. Good afternoon. Thank you.